Hey friends, this is Waylon Lewis of Elephant Journal. I just got home from a great lunch. I'm here with the puppy. And today we actually have a really big, important topic. It's not yoga, it's not meditation, it's not organic foods. It's a tough one. It's gun reform. And we have talked about this forever on Elephant. To research, to prepare for this, I was literally reading an article I wrote like 11 years ago, and nothing much has changed in terms of the basic facts. But what has changed is after, and we'll get into it with our honored guest, Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand, and one of the biggest, I think, two biggest gun safety advocacy groups. So without further ado, I'm going to let her on. Hey, Shannon. And we're going to get into it. I think I have 3 questions. What we can actually do about it, because it's kind of going in the wrong direction. What the reforms were suggesting. If you're just tuning in, please say where in the world you're from. Invite your friends. Let's get a good crowd going. I'm in Boulder, Colorado. Hey, Shannon, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I think thinking about this subject, I don't feel too good.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you doing?
It is such a mixture of sadness because of the tragedies we're seeing play out over and over again. But I have to say that there is something heartening about watching people decide to get off the sidelines and involve themselves in the democratic process.
Well, you're number one as an example. That's actually my first question, if I can jump in.
Yeah.
Because you're basically saying it's awful, but it's inspiring when people, as John Lewis talked about, are moved to good trouble, to actually getting off the couch. And that's actually inspiring. So what's your story for those who don't know in terms of becoming this, thank you so much for your advocacy and your activism, to caring about this, I assume full time at this point.
Yeah, full-time volunteer now for almost 11 years. I was a corporate communicator and had about a 15-year career when I took a 5-year break because my husband and I were blending our family. We have 5 kids together. And I was living in a suburb of Indianapolis. It was a very cold day in December of 2012. I was folding laundry and I saw the chyron that there was an active shooter in Newtown, Connecticut, a place I'd never heard of. And I sort of sat down on the bed for the rest of the day and watched this horrific tragedy unfold where 20 children and 6 educators were slaughtered in the sanctity of an American elementary school. The next day, when I woke up, I was so full of rage, I really didn't know what to do with it. And so I had 75 Facebook friends, and I thought, I'm going to start a Facebook page to have a discussion about the need for something like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, but for gun safety, because I had Googled it and I couldn't find anything.
So just to put a pin in it, you, like everyone else that day, woke up or saw the news when it happened, this horrific, sad news, and for whatever reason, you were moved to action, and you had 75 Facebook friends. You had no reason to think, I'm the one to make this happen. I'm a famous billionaire celebrity. So just to slow down on that moment, because that's what I hope we all can get to, is what happened to you that you decided, I'm not just going to be rageful or heartbroken, I'm going to actually do something?
I really felt like I had to get off the sidelines, that I was going to be complicit in the deaths of people in America if I did nothing. And, I was a teen in the 1980s, so Mothers Against Drunk Driving was incredibly influential in changing the policies and the culture in less than a decade. I mean, what they did without social media deserves its own case study, right? Were they driving to each other's house and calling each other on their rotary phones? I don't know, but they did amazing things in a short amount of time. And look, I think women are the secret sauce to advocacy and organizing in this country, all the way from prohibition up to the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, right? It's always women who sort of anachronistically are seen as the people who are supposed to care for their families and their communities, and yet we have very little political power. We hold about 25% of the 500,000 elected positions in this country. So what are the levers of power we can pull? We can use our voices and our votes. And I felt that intuitively the day after the Sandy Hook school shooting. But again, I thought I was starting a Facebook page to have the conversation about the need for an organization like MAD for gun safety. But suddenly these women and moms from all over the country that day, they had the same idea. And I just gave them a place to come together to make this happen. And here we are 10 years later, we are the largest grassroots movement in the nation.
My God. I mean, you know, the dream, there's so many great quotes. I'm inspired, you know, from the Buddhist mission to be of benefit. And there's so many great quotes like, may I be useful in the limited time I have here. May I be useful. May I be a person who is of benefit in the age with the challenges that our age is given. And you're doing that so fully. It must feel
Thank you. I too am Buddhist, so I appreciate that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I didn't realize, but so that must feel so powerful to wake up in that position. So I think my next question, which isn't an easy one, but I know you think about this stuff deeply, is kind of going in the wrong direction in a lot of ways. I don't want to be cynical, but as you know, every single shooting prompts huge spike in gun sales. We have like a ridiculous number of guns to people in this country now. We're off the charts in the worst possible way, American exceptionalism wise, in terms of, you know, guns to violence, including suicide, as someone mentioned in the comments. So we've seen inspiring examples in Australia, in New Zealand, in the UK. Following a shooting, they did buybacks. And let's say, you know, you're elected Queen of the United States. My mom always likes to say, if I were in charge, you know, what is our path forward to bipartisan sanity around this? Because as you mentioned with Moms Against Drunk Driving, like, we took something really, really dangerous and we regulated it in a very, including seatbelts, etc., like car deaths have collapsed as we regulated it, and no one has a problem with that, although they did at the time. So long question, but you know all this. What would your plan going forward be?
So I would just step back for a second and say, I agree with you that gun violence itself is going in the wrong direction, right? Gun violence is now the leading killer of kids and teens in this country. It has surpassed car accidents and cancer and other things. 146 mass shootings this year alone. Every single day, 120 people in America are killed by gun violence. Hundreds more are wounded. This is spiraling out of control. You know, the question is, we keep being told guns are going to make us safer. We have 400 million guns in this country and not enough gun laws, and yet gun violence is going up. So how many guns does it take to make us safer? Billions, right? Oh, well, that just happens to benefit the gun industry financially,
Yeah.
and it benefits some lawmakers through power. We can look at the country, because we're essentially just a patchwork quilt of state laws, right? And we can see that states that have weakened their gun laws, red states, have higher rates of gun violence and gun deaths, whilst blue states, states that have strengthened their gun laws, have less gun violence and less gun death. This is intuitive. We have to keep passing stronger laws at the state level. I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we just passed an assault weapons ban in the state of Washington. It's on the governor's desk. We also, as an organization, help pass assault weapons bans in places like Illinois and Maryland and Delaware. These laws are happening all the time. We've passed hundreds of good gun laws in state houses, background checks, disarming domestic abusers, red flag laws, secure storage, on and on. We also have a 90% track record of stopping the NRA's agenda every year for the last 7 years. These are bills that would just fly through state houses if it wasn't for Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action volunteers showing up and saying, nope, not in my community, you won't. That is important work. It makes a difference, but it isn't just legislative work, right? It is also electoral work. You have to show lawmakers that when they do the right thing, you'll have their back, and when they do the wrong thing, you'll have their job. So it isn't enough just to show up at state houses. You have to show up and get out the vote and knock doors and elect gun sense candidates and show those lawmakers who do the wrong thing that there are consequences. And then finally, the last thing I would say is this is also a cultural issue, right? We have a powerful, wealthy special interest that is saying you need more guns and you need them loaded on your bedside table at all times to shoot these intruders. We know that isn't true. We know that's a way to sell guns, but it is killing our kids, right? We're the only high-income country where toddlers get guns and use them to hurt themselves or other people by accident.
Yeah, we've all seen that like viral video of the
Yes.
father walking around with the gun.
Yes. So
one of the comments.
My point being that we have to teach people about secure storage, which means you keep your guns locked, unloaded, and separate from ammunition. And we've done that now with 8.5 million American school families. So it is those three things, legislative, electoral, and cultural.
And there's nothing, it's so frustrating because I have friends who are like, I don't think it's pro-gun or anti-gun. I don't think any of this is anti-gun. It's any responsible gun owner would believe in training, would believe in, a delay to buy the gun. That's fine. Would be fine with background checks, which police, if you purport to support police, you probably are supportive of red flag laws or, if you're really walking your talk on that. And yet we have all these idiotic talking points, frankly, just to be, I can be a jerk here. Like we just had one in the comments, like Chicago has the most violence, even though it's super, tight about gun laws. Like it has to be federal. It has to be consistent. Canada gets tons of illegal guns over the border from the US. None of this is rocket science. So I guess where I get frustrated and feel hopeless is I have intelligent friends like in the comments here or in my DMs every time a shooting happens and Elephant writes about it, where people are bringing up the same dumb talking points that don't hold water, and yet children are dying, people are dying, people are literally moving out of the US, not because they're not patriotic, but because they don't feel safe, for their children. Like we just, this guy is just repeating in the comments. It's like, why can't people just decide to care instead of getting out of their own head? Because you live in Colorado, I believe. Like
I used to. Mm-hmm.
We had this shooting just a couple miles away from me. Across the street, a University of Colorado co-ed girl walked into the wrong house one night because she was drunk and got shot. Like, come on, people. We have way more guns than anyone else and way more murders, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, if we are having discussions based on data, then it's overwhelming, the evidence that we have to show that stronger gun laws save lives, right? We can, again, look at the states. We can look at other countries. You were talking about Canada and Mexico and even Chicago. Most of their crime guns come from America or from Indiana. I mean, guns cross state borders as easily as cars do.
Exactly.
Not a mystery.
Especially when we have all these loopholes to begin with.
Right. And we're all only as safe as the closest state with the weakest gun laws. Now, I will say that just last summer, we passed the first federal gun safety legislation in a generation, 26 years. Right. And we had 15 Republicans sign on. So we are making progress. That's a seismic shift in American politics.
Yeah.
I just think that there is this very vocal minority of gun extremists. You're never going to change their mind. It doesn't matter. The vast majority of people in this country support common sense gun laws. What we need them to do is vote on this issue, to be educated. If you go to gunsensevoter.org, you can see where your candidates and your lawmakers stand on this issue. Don't vote for anyone who doesn't support stronger gun laws. And I will just tell you anecdotally, we have 4 volunteers who are now lawmakers in Missouri, and they were knocking doors in very rural areas before the election. And Republicans were saying, please put your signs in my yard, because they are so scared now that their kids aren't safe in their schools. We are going to get there. I guarantee you we are going to get there, but we all need to use our voice and vote on this issue.
That's the kind of hope sauce that I can go for. It's like, we saw Biden pass limited what he could pass. What you're saying, it is a movement the overwhelming number, even of gun owners, support common sense reform. We're not talking about taking anyone's guns away, a la Lauren Boebert,
No.
who, you know, out to lunch. And any responsible gun owner, again, doesn't want easy access to guns for criminals, or, you know, and the other talking point, maybe you could respond to this. I know you've done this 1,000 times, so thank you in advance, is but mental health care. Number one, the Republicans never actually want to support mental health care. But what is, you know, we have mental illness all around the world, but it's a unique problem here. I know our healthcare system does kind of suck, and we have awful mental health care here. Is that part of the equation to improve mental health?
You know, every time there is a shooting tragedy, Republicans have a straw man that they point to of why it happened. I actually have a running list on Medium of all the things they blamed, from antidepressants to video games to single parents to too many exit doors to not enough exit doors, and of course, mental illness, right? We have the same rates of mental illness as other high-income countries, yet we have a 26 times higher gun homicide rate than any peer nation. It's the guns, right?
Right.
We know that people who are mentally ill are much more likely to be victims of violent crime than perpetrators. So should we enhance mental health resources in this country? Absolutely. But that isn't going to address our gun violence issue necessarily. We have to regulate guns. And we haven't even tried trying when it comes to that in this country. You mentioned cars. We spent so much time and effort and money regulating cars and reducing car crashes and car deaths. When it comes to guns, gun extremists haven't let us do that. But when we do it in states, it works. And so that is why we have to push at all levels of government for these policies.
Amen. So, you know, as a final takeaway, maybe, and anything else I haven't brought up, if you'd like to mention, you know, joining Moms Demand, what are some takeaways? If, you know, if you could have your magic wand and everyone does one or two or three things with energy, not of a to-do list, but of inspiration and of wanting to actually affect change to make our children, all of us, safer.
I want to digress just a little bit
Please.
to something something that's slightly related. When there are these national shooting tragedies, people do want to get involved, and often they want to kind of like get in quick and do something and get out. That is not how activism works in this country.
Love that.
I call it the unglamorous heavy lifting of grassroots activism. It requires you to show up over and over again. It requires you to have relationships with your lawmakers, to sit in Senate and House hearings, to push back on bad bills, to support good bills. It requires you to show up at election time. It is not just a march or a rally. It is not just an assault weapons ban. I say this as a white woman who started Moms Demand Action because my kids weren't safe in their schools, or at least I was afraid they weren't. What you realize when you come to this issue is that mass shootings and school shootings are about 1% of the gun violence in this country. The daily gun violence that is killing so many Americans disproportionately impacts Black and brown people.
Yeah.
It's mostly handguns. It's also gun suicide and domestic gun violence. It is complicated and complex, and it requires holistic solutions. That includes an assault weapons ban, but it's more than that. It's also unlocking dollars for community violence intervention programs, right? It's also background checks, and it's red flag laws, and on and on. So I would just encourage people watching to find a piece of this work that they're passionate about, right? Whether it's electoral or legislative or cultural, find a piece of it and commit to doing it. If you want to join Moms Demand Action, and we're not just moms, we are mothers and others, students and survivors. If you text the word READY to 64433, a volunteer will reach out to you pretty instantaneously and tell you how to plug in where you live. And look, there are legislatures that are still in session.
Yeah.
And we are also going into an electoral cycle. So we need people to commit to doing this work.
So text READY to 64333.
64433.
Thank you. 64433.
Yep.
Text READY to that number. We'll put that in the caption and the YouTube and all that. I do have one more question, actually, which is sort of where we began with your personal story. I've gone back and forth about, I've been involved in politics locally here for decades, in a kind of peripheral way. and, helping young people get registered to vote, and, working on climate crisis and plastic and random issues, gay rights. But I've hesitated to get more directly involved because, the cliche about like good people don't get involved in politics because it's just an awful realm to be in. But you jumped in fearlessly into this realm. Like, you is there a way to actually directly serve and get involved, whether in activism or in electoral office, and kind of maintain quality of life and some semblance of feeling safe? Because I'm sure you get some nasty comments, and how do you navigate being directly involved on such a hot issue?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I started this Facebook page back in 2012, I immediately started getting threats of death and sexual violence. I have to travel with a security person and use an alias simply because I believe we should have a background check on every gun sale in this country. It's bizarre.
That
However,
kind of violent threat and reaction just says everything
yes,
any of us need to know
about
those
people who shouldn't have guns.
Yeah, those who are supporting the other side on a reasonable gun safety reform issue.
But I think early on, I and my fellow volunteers just decided, if we lose our kids, we have nothing left to lose. And these gun extremists want to silence us. They want to intimidate us into not acting. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of like, the movie Gremlins, where they feed you after night and you like lose your mind. Like when you try to silence or intimidate me, you're just making me that much stronger. And look, I think a lot of these people are just in their mom's basements. When you get out there and you meet with lawmakers, you realize you actually have more in common than you don't. You can have conversations based on data. A feminist author, Soraya Shamali, she wrote a book called Rage Becomes Her. People should check it out. It's great. But she basically said to me, Moms Demand Action is the perfect name because men are inherently afraid of their mothers. So they're either really happy to see hundreds of Moms Demand Action volunteers show up, or they're really terrified. and I think that our volunteers see that red shirt as a cape, right? They're superheroes. And that's why in the last election cycle, 140 of our survivors and volunteers ran for office and won. We have a member of Congress who is a Moms Demand Action volunteer. I just think when you start to learn the skills to be an activist, you realize you would also make a great lawmaker. And I would just say that there's sort of a moral imperative in this country right now for women to run for office.
Oof. I really needed to hear that because honestly, I have a good life. I work really hard, and I kind of don't want to ruin it by running for electoral office. But there is, we talked about Buddhism, like there is that notion of service and like, not wanting to be silenced, because in a democracy, being silenced, that's the opposite of a truly free country. So, and then let's say you're talking with like, I'm going to sneak in one more question. You're talking with like a reasonable, sane, guns rights activist who cares about, maybe they have children, they care about their children, they know people don't feel safe at, public events, farmers markets, sporting events, whatever. It's not just the violence. We're living in a nation of fear in any public space now, which it really undermines and poisons community, which is what we need. And they're saying Second Amendment, yada yada. What are some of the sort of reasonable arguments that come up, and what's your response to that? So Second Amendment, well-regulated militia, all that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up. I actually wrote a book about it. So my book, Fight Like a Mother, all the proceeds go to gun violence prevention organizations. And there's a whole chapter on myths and realities. But yes, you always hear, the Second Amendment prevents us from making gun laws. We know that's not true. Even Scalia in the Heller decision said that all rights can be regulated. Are the red flag laws, for example, go to court and they have shown to be constitutional. And also there's just data there that shows that background checks and red flag laws and disarming domestic abusers reduces gun violence and reduces gun deaths. And so, I will just give the example of my dad, who is a very conservative, Catholic, Midwest voter, voted for Donald Trump, I believe twice. I don't want to know the second time. And, when I first started doing this work, he sent me an email and, said I was wrongheaded and I was, kind of misguided. And we just had a lot of conversations. And when you can get through the gun lobby rhetoric and show data and show facts and base it less on emotion and more on what's true, where he came to was that he is so-called pro-life, anti-abortion, and he believes now that gun violence prevention should be part of his pro-life platform.
Right.
And he shows up now in his Moms Demand Action shirt and fights for stronger gun laws. So look, I think there are discussions to be had with people on both sides of the aisle. We don't win this until every lawmaker believes there will be consequences for not supporting the mainstream point of view, which is that you can have high rates of gun ownership and low rates of gun violence. And we know from looking at other nations that that is true, right? It is the unfettered, easy access to guns in this country that's killing us. And it is propagated by a wealthy, powerful special interests that has no regard for human life and only cares about profit.
Yeah. And to your point, the NRA is not synonymous or should not be with the Republican Party. Like, I was reading an old gun violence, gun reform article I put up, 11 years ago. And in it, there's an article from George H.W. Bush taking on the NRA. Similar to climate change, these used to be bipartisan issues largely. There's certainly no more bipartisan issue, as you said, with the sort of pro-life, if you want to go fully into what that would mean. If we truly care about our children, we have to care about education, gun reform. We do have to care about adoption and abortion and, safe sex education and all, it becomes a holistic thing. And I think what we do on Elephant, largely successfully, but not always, is trying to have a place for those discussions between siloed echo chambers where everyone vilifies the other. And that quote by, I think, Lincoln, that Obama used to repeat, I defeat my enemy when I make him my friend. Maybe we're not all going to be friends and kumbaya, but at least we need to dialogue and care.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we should be ambassadors for gun safety. And so the more we know, the more we learn, the more we can have those conversations. I just thought of a moment where in Maryland, our volunteers were there trying to pass a law to disarm domestic abusers, and a bunch of people showed up to protest them. They showed up with signs. They were on behalf of the gun lobby, and they came together and had a conversation, and they ended up leaving because they were like, who can oppose disarming domestic abusers, right? So sometimes it is having those conversations.
Right. Yeah, you can be pro-gun rights and pro-gun reform and pro not having, people with a history of violence have easy access to guns. Well, thank you so much. This has been so helpful. I hope, everyone has been helpful to you if you haven't thought about it, and people share, get active, as you said. We'll put the text info in the caption. Shannon, thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
If I do run for office, it'll probably be partly your fault. So I'll make it.
I'll come knock doors for you.
All right. Yeah, you'll have to come back to Colorado. All right. Well, thank you so much. Really honored, and really anything Elephant can do.
Thank you so much.
All right. Shannon, Mom's Demand, thank you so much.